Hello, my name is Christina Sanders, and today I will be speaking about the importance of chloride ions in the central nervous system and in the body. As I'm sure you remember from your first year physiology studies, a neurotransmitter is a chemical release from the presynaptic axon terminal of a nerve cell, which then travels across the synaptic cleft to the postsynaptic neuron. Shown on this slide is a refresher of how a synaptic transmission occurs in the central nervous system between two nerve cells. A major neurotransmitter, which has not yet been discussed, is gamma-aminobutyric acid, or GABA. GABA plays an important role in the central nervous system by means of inhibiting. That is, once the neurotransmitters have reached the receptors, an inhibitory response is created. This response has been suggested to aid in anxiety, depression, and stress. GABA is initially synthesized from glutamate in a reaction catalyzed by glutamic acid decarboxylase. Once this has occurred, GABA can then be released from the presynaptic axon into the synaptic cleft, where it is transmitted to the ligand-gated chloride channels, where they bind together. This binding then causes an inflow of negatively charged chloride ions into the postsynaptic cell, resulting in hyperpolarization. The hyperpolarization of the cell means it will be less likely to fire an action potential, which in turn means it will be less likely to respond to a stimulus. We'll see how that affects us in everyday life in the next slide. Much of the population has struggled with anxiety, stress, insomnia, or even seizures at some point in their life. While there are many factors that can affect these issues, it has been suggested that lower levels of GABA production in an individual can cause neurons to fire too rapidly, which results in feelings of tension and anxiety. To counteract this, health professionals may prescribe benzodiazepines such as Valium or barbiturates. Both of these drugs work by binding to GABA receptor sites, which enable the neurotransmitter to stay in that portion of the brain for longer to lengthen the amount of time the action potentials are firing more slowly. So if these drugs are useful, then one may wonder why they've been commonly linked to accidental suicide. So let's take a look. We know that they can both slow down action potentials related to anxiety and stress, but there are other parts of the body which slow down along with them, such as the lungs and blood flow. They also both increase the bioavailability of intoxicating drugs, which means taking them together can more easily lead to a drug overdose. Now we'll move on to how chloride ions play a role in skeletal muscle. As you know, this is a slide of the muscle cell and what takes place there in order to produce a contraction. What has not yet been discussed is the role of chloride ions. So as you can see on this diagram, there are portions of the skeletal muscle cell you'll be familiar with, such as the T-tubule and sarcoplasmic reticulum. However, towards the top of the diagram, you'll see what's called a CLC1 channel. These channels, found on the cell membrane of skeletal muscle, are considered to be the most important channel for increasing the resting conductance of these types of cells. By increasing the resting conductance, this prevents the cell from becoming overexcited and producing longer contractions. The role of chloride becomes more clear when looking at channelopathies such as myotonia. So what is a channelopathy? A channelopathy is a disease which causes abnormal function of ion channels. And in terms of chloride, a channelopathy can unfortunately be very debilitating. One of the most common examples of this would be in a person who has myotonia, which is the inability to relax a muscle contraction. This can be a congenital disease, which is caused by mutations to a gene called CLCN1, which inhibits the ability of the CLC1 chloride channels, as mentioned in the previous slide. Without full function of the chloride channels to prevent the cell from becoming overexcited, the muscle continues to contract uncontrollably for a period of time. This concludes my presentation on chloride. Thank you for listening, and I hope this has been beneficial for your studies.